You know, it's something that should really bother us a lot. You're right.
My question is, I've been talking to a lot of my friends and a lot of other people, and if I could characterize their emotion, I'd say that a lot of them feel kind of demoralized from some sort of feeling of failure, and I think that stems from the growing opposition that they saw prior to the war, and people that being expressed in terms of the biggest demonstration against the war ever, and then seeing the United States go to war anyway, and now kind of feeling that they've failed. And so, and also thinking that this war might be presented to the world as a huge humanitarian victory. They're going to let all the food in after they starve the people, and so on and so forth. So I was wondering if there's something that I'm missing, or something we're missing from all this, that can turn that demoralization into inspiration and some sort of success.
There's something missing, and it's in fact there's a reason why nobody ever is allowed to look at history. If you take a little look at recent history, you'll see what's missing. There was an article in the New York Times, again, yesterday, asking, what happened to the anti-war movement? It was so huge in the past. How come it's so small now? If you take a look at that article, the first date that it mentions is 1970. Okay, and it says, there was a fantastic anti-war movement in 1970. How come it's not like that now? What it didn't say is what happened before 1970. And it's not because the reporter is concealing it. She probably doesn't know. You're not allowed to know that when you go to school. What happened is that, and this is so little, it's almost unknown, but it's a fact. The war began publicly in 1962. It was in 1962 that the Kennedy administration publicly announced, not secret, that the U.S. Air Force is bombing South Vietnam, authorized chemical warfare to destroy food crops, beginning to drive millions of people into what amounted to concentration camps. That was after 7 years in which the U.S. client regime had killed maybe 70 or 80,000 people, and they couldn't control the population, so the U.S. went to direct aggression against South Vietnam. South Vietnam was always the main target of the attack. The rest of it was horrible enough, but it was peripheral. That's 1962. How much protest was there? Zero. You literally couldn't get 2 or 3 people to talk about it in the living room. Protest didn't begin for years. I won't run through the story, but as late as 1966, early 1966 in Boston, pretty liberal city, we literally could not have public protests against the war because they'd be physically broken up, with the applause of the liberal press, by students, incidentally, marching over to just smash them up. One of them in March 1966, we put in a church figuring that would be safe. No, it was attacked. The only reason it wasn't Arlington Street Church wasn't demolished was because there were a lot of police around. That's after 4 years of war. By then, hundreds of thousands of people had been killed in South Vietnam. There had been, saturation bombing of densely populated areas. The war had extended to North Vietnam for a year. You still couldn't protest it because nobody was protesting. Later, it got to be a mass popular movement, and in fact, an important one. By 1969, around 70% of the American population regarded the war as, quoting from polls, fundamentally wrong and immoral, not a mistake. Incidentally, virtually no intellectuals. That's why you don't read that. What you read is it was a mistake. But the population said, no, it wasn't a mistake, it was fundamentally wrong and immoral. And furthermore, they kept that. People have kept that attitude right up to the most recent polls about a year ago, but not among the educated sectors. For them, it was a mistake, it cost us too much, benign intentions went awry, and so on. Enormous split between the public and the educated classes. Yeah, so there finally was massive protest. This time is quite different. There's massive protest long before the war even started. That's a tremendous difference from 30 years ago. It's not the only difference. The whole country became a lot more civilized in just about every respect you can think of. There was no women's movement back then. There was no environmental movement, a couple of people maybe. There were no third world solidarity movements. There was no mass popular anti-nuclear movement. There was certainly no global justice movement. That's the last couple of years. There were no anti-sweatshop movements. I mean, just go across the board. All sorts of things have happened which have completely changed the country, including opposition to aggression and violence. And furthermore, the government is well aware of it. When the first Bush administration came in 1989, any incoming administration gets an intelligence review of the world situation. Well, usually it's secret. You know, maybe if you're lucky, you'll find out about it 40 years later. This one, a paragraph got leaked. It was barely reported, but it was very important, maybe because it was very important. And you should pay attention to it because it explains their thinking. It was about what the U.S. should do in a war against much weaker enemies. Okay? They're the only kind you get involved with for obvious reasons of prudence. It said in the case of a war against much weaker enemies, we must win rapidly and decisively because otherwise political support will collapse. It's understood to be thin. It's not the 1960s anymore, when you could go on and massacre people for years and years without any concern about opposition. And you take a look at the interventions in the 90s, that's what it is. You want to intervene, you know, you first build up an image of some genocidal power going to destroy us or something or other, and then you win an amazing victory over a much weaker enemy decisively and rapidly. Kind of what you're watching now. That's the only kind they can fight. That's an achievement. Now, these changes in the country did not, it's like the legacy I talked about before, they didn't come as a gift. You know, they came because people like you were out there in this working day after day to change the country. And it worked. It's a different country, a much better one. There are also efforts to drive it back. You know, guys with power don't like this. So, of course, they're not going to give up. They continue to fight their own war to drive it back. And if people who are concerned about these things give up, they'll win. Those who feel depressed about what just happened just don't understand. It's a major achievement, what happened. Not enough to have stopped this war, but totally different from in the past. That's we have to say goodbye, but let me end on that. If you just think about that, that tells you what we can do. Yeah.
One more. I got a good one.
I'm so sorry, but the problem is that there is another service in here, and our hosts have been very nice, so we're going to have to end. I'm very, very sorry.
Start the service late. This started late.
That's a good note to end on.